Hi, good afternoon. My name is Willie Bagasol. I'm the co-chair of the Hawaii Supreme Court Committee on Equality and Access to the Courts. On behalf of SEEK, I want to extend our heartfelt mahalo to our partners and co-sponsors at the King Kamehameha V Judiciary History Center and the Hawaii State Bar Association Civic Education Committee for helping make the 2025 Equitable and Sustainable Futures Speaker Series possible. SEEK first hosted this speaker series in 2021, then called the Racial Equity Series. During the height of the COVID pandemic, and in the aftermath of the George Floyd tragic murder, the overarching goal of SEEK's speaker series is to continue collaborations initiated 4 years ago, forge new partnerships across departments and agencies, and facilitate critical exchange of ideas and strategies. Our efforts aim to improve the administration of justice in Hawaii and to develop sustainable, creative solutions for the future of our community's safety and well-being. Mahalo for everyone joining us in person and via Zoom for our culminating discussion of the series to speak about our vital role our court system plays in upholding justice and public safety. It is my distinct honor to welcome Chief Justice Mark Recktenwald to the podium.
All right. Mahalo, Judge Bagasol, and welcome everyone to Ali'i Hale. It's my honor to be here tonight to give opening remarks at this last session in what I think has been a very, very successful series. And I was so glad that this series was launched. The one back in 2021 came at a very traumatic time, both in our community and nationally. And I thought it significantly advanced the conversations that we had in the judiciary, as well as with our community partners, about how we could do better in our justice system in a variety of different ways. And I'm so glad that we're building upon that and now taking on issues I think that are particularly relevant in today's world and keeping that momentum going. And I'm so grateful to the Committee on Equality and Access to the courts, Willie, Judge Bagasol, and Justice McKenna, who's here tonight. They do a great job of leading that committee. And they have a whole lot of folks who help them out in this effort of putting tonight's panel on. Judge Rebecca Copeland, Brianna Gouveia, who's over here on our Zoom link, Catherine Piazza, Professor Pettit Toledo, Carrie Ann Shirota, and Ruth O. So can you please join me in acknowledging and thanking them? And I know we have some other SEAC members here. I see J.C. Mikulinic, Judge May, Judge Sandra Sims, I think, is going to be joining us. So it's really a very vibrant, strong committee, and it's done a great job of keeping us focused on issues that relate to really being the kind of justice system that we want to be, a system that truly is fair, that's accessible, where people feel respected, and they feel aloha when they come into our courtrooms. And it also takes a broader view of looking at our justice system and asking how we can do better, how we can better address the needs of the folks who are coming in contact with the criminal justice system and better meet the needs of our community. And this event tonight, I think, really fits into that theme, and it really is focusing on using the principles of trauma-informed care and asking how can we bring that to bear on our justice system. And that's something that we as judges see and really have come, I think, to understand individually and collectively how important the role of trauma can be, that trauma can play in the lives of individuals who later on find themselves being engaged with the justice system. And so often we can trace back to events that happened earlier in their lives, and that really, if you don't address the issues raised by that trauma, often it's a very, very difficult thing to be able to get people back on a good path in their lives. And so we've really seen that in family court. That's why I'm really excited that we have Judge Hall here, beginning with girls' court 20 years ago. And that program worked so well because I think it recognized the effect of trauma in the lives of those teenage girls who were beginning to come into the juvenile justice system. And it was so effective that we were able to expand it to the adult, to adult women in the justice system with a 3-year pilot. And I'm very grateful to the legislature for making that pilot program permanent this last session. And I'm very hopeful that Governor Green will sign that into law. The other thing I think that really stands out about these sessions is the fact that we're able to engage with other folks in our community who really care about these issues, bring different perspectives, and start a conversation that I hope will continue well beyond tonight. And we're very grateful for that. And I want to particularly shout out to Tia Hartsock from the Office of Wellness and Resilience. I really appreciate Governor Green's commitment to that effort. We've seen her at many different forums. She's really been an incredibly strong, informed voice for bringing these principles to bear and trying to make our government more responsive, more effective to the needs of the folks it's supposed to serve. And so I'm very, very grateful for her being here tonight. I'm super grateful to all of our speakers, and I think she's going to introduce the speakers for you shortly. Thank you all for being here. Mahalo and aloha.
Okay, aloha mai kako. Mahalo for joining us this afternoon. My name is Tia Roberts Hartsock, and I'm the director. I don't know why I'm reading my own introduction. Director of Office of Wellness and Resilience, housed in the Office of the Governor, and I'm very honored to be here to serve as a moderator this evening with these amazing women. First off, thank you, Chief Justice, for that lovely introduction. I want to share a little bit of context. This is as Chief Justice said, this is the fifth and final panel discussion of the Equitable and Sustainable Future Speakers Series. On behalf of the King Kamehameha V Judiciary History Center, I want to officially thank Chief Justice Mark Recktenwald, the Hawaiʻi Judiciary, and the Hawaiʻi Legislature for their support in providing space for this important conversation. With us today, again, I'm so honored to be sitting here with these amazing women, and I wanted to introduce our distinguished guests for the evening. First off, to my left, Judge Jessie Hall, the District Family Court Judge of Oahu's First Circuit. Next to her is Dr. Jamie Mahealani Miller, the co-founder and president of Ekolu Mea Nui. Then Dr. Lorinda Riley, an associate professor for the University of Hawaii at Manoa Department of Public Health Sciences. And Melenani Waiʻalai, she is a private attorney and the executive director of Kale o Kalahui. And finally, Kimi Takata. She is a re-entry oversight specialist for the Hawaii Correctional System Oversight Commission. I encourage all of our attendees to utilize the Zoom Q&A function at the bottom of your webinar screens. Thank you for joining us online. Please submit questions and comments for our panelists to answer during the last 10 minutes of the program. Friendly reminder that this discussion is being recorded and will be posted on the Judiciary History Center's YouTube channel. First off, I wanted to acknowledge the Judiciary's foundational work. As Chief Justice Recktenwald mentioned, over 20 years ago, 21 years ago now, Girls Court was established as a specialty court, and I really wanted to acknowledge Judge Karen Radius for her foundational work in the judiciary to really bring trauma-informed care and the principles around trauma-informed care and really acknowledging the foundation and roots of where trauma begins and really wanting to look and see what that looks like in order to inform the way that the courts approach and respond to girls. This informed a lot of work, including the program that I was lucky enough to be on at the Child and Adolescent Mental Health Division, Project Kealoho. Judge Radius was one of my board members, and so she was extremely influential, as was the Girls Court model, to some of this work that we continued with trauma survivors. It continued again through the correctional system with Dr. Uchigaki Uchi, who is here with us. Mark Patterson, and many, many hands that initiated work in the Women's Community Correctional Center. And so this work really, in terms of trauma-informed care in our state, was initiated very heavily in the judiciary. So I really want to take a moment to just recognize that the work that has been done in the judiciary has been so instrumental in getting us to where we are today in the state. So much so that last February, Governor Green signed an executive order and really did a call to action for the executive branch, discussing and sharing out information around creating trauma, Hawaii as a trauma-informed state. We're the second state in the country to have a governor declare that through an executive order, and it is our guiding light in the executive branch to really try and push toward creating a very healing space, a very much informed space to understand the roots of trauma and how it shows up every day for those whom we serve, those who we work with, ourselves as administrators and staff all across the board. I wanted to also quickly acknowledge part of my office's Office of Wellness and Resilience. Our Kuleana, our responsibility is heavily rooted in that executive order and the legislation that is guiding our mandate to implement and look and see across the departments, how do we create a more just healing system centered around understanding the root causes of trauma. So thank you for that. I'd like to now kind of jump into our discussion. It would be lovely, we're gonna have a conversation, and so we look very formal. I feel very formal. However, we want to really have a conversation about this. We have unbelievable minds working on this across our state, and we have several questions to kind of guide the conversation, but I would like to invite a conversation amongst you all. But first of all, we're going to start off with kind of setting the stage. And when we're looking at creating a trauma-informed justice system, and especially looking at in the courts and the correctional environment, what does it mean? And I'm going to start with Dr. Miller. What does it mean for us here in Hawaii to have a justice system be trauma-informed? And why is that important in Hawaii's unique historical and cultural context?
Mahalo. Let me put this closer. Aloha, everyone. Mahalo for that, the question and the conversation. I'm going to rely on everyone else here to chime in. What I want to continue in saying is also to acknowledge where we are as a state in Hawaii, that without trauma-informed care, its principles, the office that Tia runs, the court system, and all of these frontline workers here, we wouldn't be in a place where we could be more accepting of Native Hawaiian healing methods. And so I'm going to answer this from a Native Hawaiian perspective, in that we believe that our words can either bring life or bring death. And when you think about the term trauma-informed care, it kind of centers us on trauma, which really, and I'm looking at Makalika because her comments from the very first panel was around a very short occupation of colonialism in comparison to a super long history of Native Hawaiians being here. And so when you think of the term trauma-informed care, we're really only looking at those couple hundred years of occupation, and not centering on us as a people that was abundant and thriving for thousands of years. And then when you think about our ike kupuna in the Olelo No'eau, around what I just mentioned, around our words give us either life or death, you want to look at terms and language. And so Tia alluded to it in that we've evolved from being trauma-informed to more of a caring-informed, a healing-informed, a culturally grounded, informed system. I feel that the judiciary of all systems is probably ahead of other systems in our state in really welcoming that kinds of ideas and methods to Hawaii and for our people. And so it really is, as I said, we are evolving and we recognize the trauma that has occurred here, but we also know that our ancestors are greater than the trauma. And so that must mean we are greater than the trauma and we can do better than what we have been doing. And we can do better in our judiciary in recognizing the Native Hawaiian healing methods that we come from and that have worked for thousands of years. So for me, it's respecting trauma-informed care and the principles and everyone that for over the past 20-something years, I think that's when I first met you, 20-something years of work. And we're at a different place now where we can move forward and be encompassing of healing efforts that are more centered on life versus the trauma. And I would like to welcome Melilani to go beyond that, because we did have a small discussion and she has other mana'o for this.
Mahalo.
Yeah.
Mahalo nui. I think this is good. Okay. Aloha, I'm Melenani. Yeah, we had some discussion back and forth, and the reason being that I was kind of like, luckily I feel comfortable and safe to have these real conversations. And to me, I was like, oh, I kind of have mixed feelings about that. So my background is I'm a PhD student in political science, and we're often from a social scientist type of perspective looking at these terms. And I'm also Kanaka, and if we look at things like ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, I have a background where I was kind of often told I wasn't probably going to succeed. I actually had counselors tell me that. So I am very cognizant, or at least I try to be, of how things are termed and how we word them to people, and therefore how we take that in. But one of the things I was thinking is that when we have the word trauma-informed, it also calls attention to the trauma that has taken place. And to me, that's important because it calls attention to trauma that takes place in systems like our settler institutions as a Kanaka, and where our criminal justice system, our prison systems can be viewed a certain way, and having understandings of that. I also, because the organization I'm with, Kaleo Kalahui, and the work that I do in regards to domestic violence and sexual violence, it's a term that's commonly used. And so I try to step back from that because I've been immersed in it. But some of the things I also appreciate of it is that it also allowed me to have a space to write in grants or to explain to people about settler colonialism in the world of domestic violence. And I feel, and sexual violence and family violence, and it's been a new pathway for us. And so I want to, as we evolve and move forward, think about how these new terms, what they bring, what they might not bring along with them. And lastly, I think of also those who are working in the criminal justice system and secondary trauma, vicarious trauma, and what they might be going through, and being cognizant of that, because that affects how they show up to work and how they show up for those in the system. So we kind of were like, hey, what do we do? It's important, right? We're having these discussions, and we don't have all of the answers, but the discussion is important, and the thoughts behind them and what they mean were kind of what we took away from our pre-panel talk.
Yeah, and I think that the language we use, like you said, like you both said, is critical in how it shapes the conversations that now I feel like we weren't able to have these conversations 10 years ago even. Definitely not 20 years ago, in these types of forums of what this means in our systems, the ways in which we can improve our systems. And I know that still occurs today, in our systems. We want to make sure that we're uplifting and honoring the work that people do in these, because it's not easy work. This, as you all know, system work is very challenging work. You had mentioned that kind of rooted in language piece, and I'm so grateful that our office is called the Office of Wellness and Resilience and not the Office of Trauma. Because it would make a big difference. And a lot of the research that we look at, especially indigenous research focused on Native Hawaiians, the disparities that we see, that we all know, that it shows up in every system. I'm going to shift to Dr. Riley for a minute. Focusing on resilience research and focusing on the positive attributes that, and like you said, thriving Native cultures for generations and generations. I'm so interested in your thoughts, Dr. Riley, about your focus and your decisions to focus your research on resilience, especially with kupuna.
Yeah, so thank you for that question. Aloha, everyone. I think that my understanding and my use of terminology has actually changed quite a bit since I started. And I've only really been doing this work for like 5 years. But at first, I was really focused on historical trauma and thinking about the impact of the colonial system on Native Hawaiians and how that has impacted their opportunities and the environments that they live in. But I've kind of shifted more to, I wouldn't even necessarily say resilience. I think there's been several shifts. Resilience is something that, like, how do you bounce back when there is some kind of adversity in your life? And that's great, but I actually hope for more. You know, I hope for more for our people. I hope that we have well-being, that there's wellness within our entire community, individuals, and at a larger level too. So yeah, I think language is super important. I appreciate you bringing in that Olelo No'eau. I was thinking about that as well in this conversation. But I think that we need to acknowledge the trauma and the colonization and all the things that happened, but we need to move forward beyond that. That needs to contextualize our efforts to strengthen the community.
And kind of on that same note, when we're thinking about this from like a public health lens, and we look at it when we're trying to do justice reform efforts in our systems, with that kind of insight around the generational and structural trauma, how would you feel, or how do you think it informs the way in, and how that can help shape justice reform efforts here in Hawaii, when it's specifically kind of anchored in understanding and acknowledging generational and structural trauma?
That's a great question. So I think that one of the things that we really need to do, and another Olelo No'eau that's coming to my mind, is that we need to look to the past to move forward, right? So there is a wellspring of knowledge that our kupuna had in ways of dealing with conflict and dealing with perhaps behaviors that were deemed not socially appropriate. And we need to return to those. We need to understand those behaviors and bring them forward. And I think that the structural issues that occur that we are living in today, these are things that can be informed by our ancestral knowledge. And I think that bringing individuals who have that knowledge into specific positions is critically important. Also training individuals so that everyone has this basic understanding of Hawaiian knowledge and ike kupuna.
Thank you for that. When we think about what this looks like in a courtroom, and bringing that kind of that knowledge and bringing that ancestral awareness and training, when trauma shows up in our courtrooms, in defendants and survivors, with families, even in legal professionals, I'm wanting to turn to you, Judge Hall. From your experience on the bench, how do you feel judges are currently equipped or unequipped? And Dr. Riley was kind of alluding to, looking at possibly, providing trainings and comprehensive approaches. How do you feel judges are equipped to respond or unequipped to respond in a trauma-informed way?
Well, judges receive a lot of training regarding trauma. In fact, Judge Riley last year during our family court symposium, which is where the judges from family courts across the entire state come to receive training, she provided a training for us on historical trauma. and what it looks like, what it means. So we do receive extensive training. We have twice a year a statewide conference where all the judges across the state come. Every year we have our family court symposiums, and then we have family court, which is unique in of itself because we deal with a lot of trauma. Really good people who are at their worst situation. So we don't deal with just the criminal justice, although we do have that with our juveniles, but we deal with divorces and paternities and domestic violence TROs. So there is just a wealth of trauma that we want to learn about. So we are provided extensive training. And I did want to bring up what trauma looks like in the courtroom. I mean, for us, it's abusive behavior that people have learned from abuse that they've experienced or witnessed as children. It is substance abuse when people are trying to numb the pain that they're feeling from their emotional and mental health issues. For legal professionals, it's the vicarious or secondhand trauma by having to hear and read about everyone else's trauma that we have to deal with. And we also receive training on that. How do we take care of ourselves? Because we do absorb a lot of that trauma. And sometimes some of our decisions, we have to be very careful, especially in custody cases. We have to keep in mind that our decisions should not cause trauma on these children that have no say in the process and what's going on. Because majority of our juveniles do not have two parents in the home. They come from the term broken home. Either their parents are apart, sometimes they don't even know one parent, sometimes they're foster kids, sometimes they're not foster kids, but Tutu is taking care of them because the parents aren't there. So we do have to keep that in mind. And my area when it comes to the criminal side is with juveniles. So one thing we know for a fact is research is clear that juveniles have higher rates of mental health and emotional health issues. Juveniles have higher rates of learning deficiencies. Juveniles have higher rates of exposure to domestic violence. So if we can focus on those traumas and help heal them early on, they can become great productive members of our society.
I love how you mentioned, well, first of all, thank you, Dr. Ali, for doing those trainings and for the judiciary, really the openness that you folks have in seeking out that information and really getting that ongoing professional development, because I always like to think about trauma-informed care as half of it is for those whom we serve. It's for how we engage, it's for how we respond and how we approach, as I mentioned. The other half of trauma-informed care is for us, those whom are in the helping profession. We all come with our stuff, and it all comes out sideways in different ways every day. And so to me, I think the trauma-informed care lens is so critical when we think about this is a kako effort, and everyone involved in reform and everyone involved in creating a just, fair system has that stake in this, has that kuleana in this, these change efforts. So thank you for mentioning that. It really, to me, leads to this unbelievable effort and movement over the last couple of decades. As we move through creating reform, especially in our criminal justice and judicial systems, we want to ensure that these reforms are guided by and very much so included by the voices that are directly impacted by this, including survivors who are in the helping profession. If we've lived this long, I always say we've experienced trauma, right? We've experienced grief and loss. We've experienced witnessing violence, and many of us have experienced different levels of interpersonal violence. But I feel like it's so important and critical to have that lived voice that are directly impacted. And I'm curious from everybody's perspective, but I want to start with Kimmy. How do you feel we should ensure that trauma-informed reform efforts include the voices that are directly impacted, and how can we collectively, but as survivors in general, and those with lived experience, be meaningfully involved? Meaningfully involved, not just at the table just because you're here, but have a meaningful involvement and voice in when decisions are made, how decisions are made, what informs those decisions. How do we have that meaningful involvement in the justice system reform efforts from your perspective?
Well, hello. I think for me, being in the prison system and spending 15 years in prison, so I would know the inside of what kind of trauma would be brought to the prison, right? Including me. Imagine this, okay? Just imagine this. Your mother, you're 6 years old, puts you in the closet, and then when she feels better and happy, she'll take you out and say, I love you, and does that continuously until you're like 12 years old. So now when you're out in the real world, your thoughts, your mindset is different. And so you look at people in a different way, like trust, there's no trust, right? And so you have that thinking about, okay, well, nobody loves me, so why should I love myself? It's just a whole bunch of things that you learn while being in that closet. And now you're trying to numb that pain and you start to do drugs. Okay, that feels better. My life is better temporarily. But then you gotta go out and find more drugs, right? And so it just continues this path of destruction, right? With that thinking, okay, my mom didn't care about me. So that means you, and whoever's trying to be nice to me doesn't care about me, right? And so as you grow up and you learn those ways, you learn the street ways, you learn how to survive, you learn that you gotta survive and fend for yourself, right? And so living like that on the streets forever, not even learning what a hug is, or, or are you okay, or anything like that. It's just physical and mental abuse continually. And then when you get older, you end up in prison, right? And so for me, going through all of these things, trauma, whatever it is that I went through as a kid, and then ended up in prison, right? The lived experience that I was surrounded with, all the women that was locked up with me, they actually taught me how to love, because I didn't know how to love. So having those peers near me, talking to me, inspiring me to get my GED, like just all these things that I was surrounded by was lived experience, and their voices is so powerful. And so when I bring to the table, back to Tia's question about lived experience, I think, I want to say that since I came out of prison, and hanging out with people who have lived experience like me, I've watched people run their own nursing homes, be big bosses, become their own safety inspectors, and run their own businesses. I mean, I saw miracles happen, and it's because people listen to their voices, right? I think having voices of lived experience is important, and me being on the Hawaii Correctional System Oversight Commission, right? And as the reentry oversight specialist, I can see the gaps, right? And now looking at it as a whole, system, there's a lot of gaps. And even though you you plug this gap and you plug that gap, there's another hole coming out, water still shooting out. So as a whole, for organizations and people who are interested in advocating and supporting our men and women who are incarcerated, we have to work together, not as silos, right? Have a peer support, hire a peer support, you know, listen to them because they know what they know exactly what they need. They know exactly what they're talking about. They know what they need. Like, I mean, I don't know. I just think that lived experience is important. And yeah, I don't know if that made sense. Or I was just, I don't
No,
know.
thank you. Does anybody want to add to that question from an advocate perspective? I know we've got, you know, as an attorney advocating from a nonprofit perspective, creating system reform. Yep,
I
please.
could just add, you know, I think that it's so important to get these stories out there, to get people's their stories, their experiences out in the public. I think that's the only way that we're going to start creating enough movement from the general population to create change. Because right now, I think we have some people who really support restorative methods and trauma-informed care, and we have some people who maybe don't, right? They kind of have this attitude of like, you did the crime, do the time, and very punitive focused. And I think that the stories, putting a face to these people, what has happened to them and where they can go and what they've been able to accomplish in their lives is critically important to making that larger system change.
I think that perhaps one of the gaps is, I mean, Kimmy speaks for so many women. I don't know if there's a counterpart male for you. I don't really see justice involved juveniles where they have space too. So I feel like there is a gap in how do we bring them to the table, and how can they be heard when they're telling their stories, that we don't have space for that. We don't make enough space for that. We have a youth council with Ekolumeanui, and they're the youth voice, and these are justice impacted youth, meaning a parent or a loved one has been incarcerated or is incarcerated or has been incarcerated. And that's our strategy to end intergenerational incarceration, because they have a 75% higher chance of being incarcerated as adults, just because a parent or a loved one is incarcerated or was incarcerated in their life. And so we want to hear from them, like what is it that they feel they need in their lives, being justice impacted youth, so that they do not go in that trajectory that their parents have been, or grandparents or aunts and uncles. And we don't have capacity to serve all the youth that are impacted by incarceration, because we're just a really small organization. And I wish there were more organizations that would do that, because they come up with brilliant ideas. And I mean, we've had them for about a year now. They're all Native Hawaiian. And we can just see how life has been different for them in this past year, because of the different opportunities, or even just because we're listening. Somebody's listening to them and they feel that they're being heard and that they can make a difference in their own lives and in their families' lives. And so I don't think there's enough opportunity for our people that are touched by incarceration to come to the table and lend their voices.
And that peer support kind of effort to advocate for those voices that are oftentimes shut down. And this, like Judge Hull kind of alluded to it, the vicarious trauma that comes from sometimes it's overwhelming. However, the only way that we're going to get through real systems change is acknowledging, hearing, understanding, empathizing, and being able to look through how policies and procedures that we have need to be revised and need to be established from that lived experience lens. So the work that you folks are doing in this realm and all of these different levels is just critical to this reform effort. Kind of along those lines, when we look at those policies and procedures and we really think about, you know, I often hear in the field, oh, well, where's the accountability for what trauma-informed care is just, you know, oh, it's okay, you guys can do whatever, and we'll give you a pass because you've had a hard life. Obviously, that is not what trauma-informed care is about, but it's a common misunderstanding, I think, and I engage in those conversations from time to time, but there is a balance to understanding what trauma-informed policies and practices can look like. There's a balance with concerns around accountability. Public safety comes up all the time, and the concept of due process. I'm going to turn to Mele Nani and Judge Hall. What are your thoughts around balancing those concerns around accountability and due process in the legal realm?
I get to go first. Awesome. You know, I've been thinking about trauma-informed, and as a service provider organization at Kaleo Kalahui, it informs how I'm supposed to work with someone. So not necessarily labeling them as experiencing trauma, but more so telling me, like, handle with care, how I'm going to approach the situation. As a family law attorney, sometimes I have a survivor that might be angry, might be kind of rude to me, might be kind of aggressive seeming, but if I'm coming from a trauma-informed approach, I'm thinking, wow, they're like explaining all of this really difficult stuff to me that they went through that they may not have told anyone else, that they're probably having a hard time like recognizing themselves, that they're in a fight or flight mode. And so I'm just going to show them a little more grace than I might show someone on the street being rude to me. I try to be, you know, show aloha everywhere I go. But when I'm sitting in that role as the attorney, and that's an authoritative figure to some people in some cultures, I'm also Filipina, very respectful of someone in that position. Sometimes they just tell me yes, 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 and they don't even know what I'm saying. So I have to be mindful of that if I'm coming from that place of privilege. And so when I'm thinking of trauma-informed, and does that affect things like accountability or due process, I don't think that it should hinder that. I think it's how we go about that and what we're leaving people with as we go through it. When we lead our talk story session, so we meet every Thursday to talk story with our group, and when we talk about people's experiences in the legal system, a lot of the survivors, and myself included when I went through it, sometimes we don't remember what was happening, like what the judge even ruled sometimes. It's more so the feelings and what we experienced, how we were treated, how people responded to us sharing that we were abused. Were they listening? Did they care? And so those things go a long way, and it's not affecting the ruling, but more so how you go about saying it.
And if you're doing restorative justice and you're not holding people accountable for their actions, you're doing it wrong. They need to be held accountable. Restorative justice, trauma-informed care is not meant to give them an excuse for their behavior. They still have to be held accountable to the victim. It's about listening to them, though, trying to find out what is that root cause that drove them down this path instead of going to the other path. Why did they choose this path? Was it their family makeup? Was it what they've lived through? And then once you can listen to them and find that root cause, then you can treat it. And if you treat that, then you have a higher likelihood of not having them come back into the system because they don't have that nagging at them anymore. They've learned to move past it. I was lucky enough, excuse me, in March to go to Aotearoa and experience some of their courts. And one of the amazing things that they have for juveniles is called a family group conference, in which the juvenile, their family, the attorneys, social workers, program providers, and the victim if they want to participate. And the idea is they're all there to work together to figure out, one, how is the youth going to give back to the victim for their actions? Two, what does this youth need to never come back into the system again? And the idea is they come up with a consensus as they work together. When the victim is there, the victim gets to hear about the youth. They get to hear about their background. You know, maybe the youth stole from them thousands of dollars and they want all this money back. When they hear that this family is barely making it, they're living check by check, they realize, I can't get blood from a stone. Why am I going to make this family worse by requiring them to pay this money? And one of the programs we went to, the victims were actually willing to take art pieces. They're willing to take work from the youth. So there is ways to give back and to pay for your actions and hold people accountable. But you also got to get back to that root cause. So that way we heal from that, they can move on, and they become great productive members of our society.
Can I just echo that? So when I was in law school, the second year, I did an internship at DNA Legal Services, which is on the Navajo Nation Reservation. And one of the departments that they had was kind of supporting the peacemaking. So Navajo Nation has a really strong history in peacemaking and using traditional methods to resolve conflict. But yeah, I had the opportunity to talk with people, to sit in on one session. And one of the things that struck me is that it has to be voluntary. So you have the perpetrator and the victim there, but they're surrounded by people that care about them, both parties, right? And so you really do understand what is going on in each individual's lives and kind of come up with a solution that does hold them accountable, but also reinforces that they have a place back in that community. And it's about making the individual, the victim, whole, but also the community whole. Because oftentimes when you're doing some of these activities, like the one I sat in on was someone graffitied a garage. So the holding them accountable was to actually repaint the garage, to provide services, right? It provides that accountability to make an actual apology. And oftentimes those kinds of things, not only do they heal, but it's harder. It's harder than just paying money, right? Because you have to deal with the consequences of your actions. But that was one of the things that was really instrumental, changed the direction of, the work that I wanted to do, and ended up in, restorative justice and trauma-informed care as a result.
Go ahead.
Dr. Riley makes a really good point. When you're focusing on trauma-informed care, the process that somebody has to go through to reach that healing is extremely difficult. In no way is it easy. They're facing their worst demons and they're hitting them head on. So it's not an easy process in the least.
I can add to that. So I get to go into women's prison and Waiava and teach ho'oponopono methods. Initially, we thought we could do ho'oponopono in the prison, but you can't do it in the prison. But we can teach them what ho'oponopono is, and they can reflect and really start the process with themselves. And so we're working with men and women who have 6 months to 2 years before they come out. And they are wanting to change. It's voluntary as well. They want to change and they want to come out to a better support system. And so when you think about the overrepresentation of Native Hawaiians in all of these systems, you kind of wonder, like, why is this? What's wrong with our people? What's wrong with our families? And having that lens through ho'oponopono kind of puts things into perspective in that our ohana is the greatest support system that a person can have. And I'm not only talking about like a biological ohana, because many of them don't have that, but they can identify what an ohana means to them and start from there and be very ohana centered through the healing and the re-entry. And so I've also seen that these practices, our native practices, have worked. And these are people that have been incarcerated for 20 years, 20 plus years. They're maxing out. The men that I work with, they're maxing out. So they're going to come out anyways. And they're choosing to want to learn new techniques and new ways of healing so that they don't recidivate. And so just to echo what you folks are saying and kind of bringing it home to Hawaii and what that means for us here and trying to bring down that recidivism rate for our people and really looking and trying to adapt to what healing methods are available and how do we implement them in this kind of foreign environment or space, which is our prison system, yet coming back into a space that they're very familiar with, and what kind of changes need to occur to not just that person, but when you ohana centered, it's also the ohana members that are a part of this. And so just really creating the greatest support system that is available for our people when they return.
You're all touching on an extremely critical part of trauma, the trauma impacts from when we experience events that have a pervasive effect on the way in which we engage in our life. And the symptoms from trauma oftentimes leads us to disconnect, right? To disconnect from ourselves, to disconnect from our ohana, to disconnect from, our own bodies, from our own minds, and ways that we find very effective ways to disconnect, right? But here in Hawaii, we really think about what the disconnection from place means. And when we pull people from, different islands and we pull them from their communities and disconnect them from their language, disconnect them from their ways of being in their community, that becomes even more traumatizing, right? And you touched on an example like Ho'oponopono in and implementing that, teaching what that process looks like and how we can heal from those types of approaches. Can any of you, I want this to be open to anyone, can any of you share an example when we're thinking about in the context of creating connections? So I don't want to focus on the disconnection too much, but I want to look at that, creating connections in a place like the judiciary, the court systems, the correctional systems. Can we think about examples of culturally grounded, and I'm going to use the word healing, healing practices that you see has made a difference in people whom you work with, or the communities that you've worked in? What types of culturally grounded healing practices have you seen that has made a difference?
I can share. So, all my experiences come from prison, and these were really great experiences, so excuse me. While I was in prison, our warden, who at the time was Mark Patterson, who has this brilliant mind about a pu'u honua, right? Having a pu'u honua. And I remember him, you want to talk about connections, he brought all these volunteers in to touch us, to teach us, to help us, to show us genuine love, right? Like, we really care and we want to support you, right? And that whole focus. And at the same time, he brought in cultural healing, right? I've never made an imu or even made lau lau, but he brought in, people with volunteers that helped us and taught us hula and, everything to do with, cultural healing, right? And so all of these things that I learned while I was in there, I remember when he told me, he said, "Kimmy, when you walk through these gates, you are forgiven." And I was like, what? Nobody can forgive me for what I did. But then as a leader, right, I'm looking at him like, wow, what a trip, right? Like, but I'm learning through all these volunteers. It's a two-way touch, right? And he would say like, you know, what the prison has, the gift the prison has is the gift of attraction. And when he said that, I saw so many volunteers that really cared, that showed us, the women in the prison, support, and really, really treated us like human beings. They listened to us, and they it was just a trip for me because, you know, but I think having people and volunteers to come in and help like Mark did, he created a place of healing, right? It was a creating a place of healing. And so I'm a product of that, right? Because I used to think, oh, I'm going to prison because I'm being punished because I did the crime. So now I got to do the time, right? And I didn't have any problem with it. I accepted it. And when he said that can prison be a place of healing? Of course it can. You just got to stop looking at everybody over here and then focus on, okay, accountability, right? Focus on forgiveness, focus on what you need to change, yeah? And when people hold me accountable, be open, right? And so doing all these programs in the women's prison really helped heal me and help me to grow. It actually helped me to grow to where, like, I wasn't, I was put in these leadership positions to learn, right? And I always had a volunteer or someone next to me to support me, you know? So, I mean, for me, going to prison was a blessing, actually, yeah.
I can add from our youth council this past ledge session, they had their own little ledge package. It was so cute. And they, with the help of Carrie Ann, they wrote a resolution because they felt that their experiences in Aina-based learning had helped them do healing and get more in touch with their culture, and felt that every person, whether you're Hawaiian or not, should have that kind of Aina exchange experiences. So they wrote a resolution that got passed, right, Carrie Ann? Got passed, got accepted, or whatever the term is. And it is to have the family courts or juvenile courts recognize Aina-based learning programs for hours of their community service hours. And so they jumped on that. They wrote that. It was well received by the legislature. And then they took it a step further, and they're calling on throughout the Pai Aina. They're visiting different, they talk to Aloha Aina experts, and they are putting together a list and the reasons why these types of experiences are important, whether you're working in the lo'i or at a fish pond, but really wanting OPO to get, or youth to get reconnected to their community. And so they are identifying different Aina learning place-based projects throughout the state so that they can give it over to the courts to utilize as a referral source.
And just real quick, I know. About 2 years ago, the Judiciary started their juvenile diversion program. And we needed programming to send kids to, so we reached out to our community partners. And some of the programs we wanted them to be culturally based. Partners in Development Foundation stepped up and created the whole Kanaka program. A group of us, discussed how it was going to look, what it was going to look like, what are the parameters. We have had 6 cohorts come through the program. The idea of Ho'okanaka, it's being held at Kupa'aina, which is on the property of Kawaiola. And it's getting kids back on the aina. And they're healing through working on the farm. They're learning about themselves as they do it. The youth, because they are diversion youth, once they complete the program, which is 6 weeks long, they can apply for expungement of their record, which helps them in the future because now they don't have to disclose anything when they apply for college. They don't have to disclose anything when they want to go into the military. So that's just one really good example of reaching out to community partners in trying to create programming. We need way more, so if anybody has more, so I thank you for that.
We have
can
a
definitely
statewide
use it.
And when you think about the origins of Girls Court, this was the model to get the girls out into the community, to connect them with their with people that are advocates in the community and champions in the community for them, and connect them, have them get to know them, so that they recognize, oh, Auntie Faye, she works at so-and-so in Waikiki, and they do surfing, and they do this, and they do that. And it's these different opportunities to bring back people and have them feel like they are not alone, and they will not be alone when we have more connections. And every single one of us, I think, can relate to the concept of when we're disconnected from a place, from a space, from land, from the earth, like if we get quite literal about it, and we're in an office all day, on a computer, staring at other people on a Zoom, and we go home and stay inside and cook dinner and then watch TV and go to bed and get up and do it all again. What does that do to us over time? And how do we get so disconnected from putting our bare feet in grass and in a lo'i or in the sand? And what does that do to us? Whenever I talk to people about wellness, and I say, what do you do to take care of yourself? What do you do to get back to your baseline? What do you do to re-energize and fill your cup? So many people will either talk about connecting with their family, or connecting with their friends, their chosen family, or connecting with the aina. It is biological. It is proven in science what it does to our brains, what it does to our body, how it heals us. So that disconnection over generations, in this is my personal soapbox, so I'll stop in a second. It's not about this. But it is critical to the reconnection of the way that we engage in a healing practice with each other. So thank you for sharing those examples. And again, to the brilliance and the original ideas around the concept of getting girls connected to community through the Girls Court model. We can talk all day about the great things that we know work, but I want to acknowledge that there are barriers. There are barriers that we still have in our systems, whether they're institutional, whether they're cultural, whether they're interpersonal, that prevent these types of approaches from being implemented across the systems. And consistently, we want to make sure that whether we're talking executive branch, judicial branch, legislative branch, what kind of policies and procedures or practices in terms of change, because this is the magic wand question. I'm a social worker, so I'm going to always talk about these magic wand questions. What policies would have the most immediate impact on advancing a trauma-informed justice system in Hawaii? If you could use your magic wand and say tomorrow, you wave your wand, tomorrow this policy is changing, what would that be? And I'm going to let's go down the line. Kimmy, can we start with you?
I can't see the.
Or we can come back. We can
come back.
Yeah, we'll come back.
I don't know why, but an article I read that featured Nipsey Hussle talking about getting out of survival mode just came to mind. But I think it speaks volumes for me and for my experience and what I see in the people that I work with. We need policies that make it possible for people to live here in Hawaii, to be sustaining themselves when we have high rates of poverty, incarceration, substance abuse, or more so substance use to medically treat, to self-heal, or however we want to say it. Really looking at ways to make it possible for people to live here. As a survivor, I constantly struggled with financial security, with housing, with access to childcare, and making it in a way that it's streamlined or more connected, in that I had to go to multiple agencies and they all didn't talk to each other and they all had different requirements, and it was pretty much almost a full-time job to meet the requirements of these different agencies. And I'm a pretty learned person and I really had a hard time. So we need to make it possible. It really felt impossible.
I think for me, it's to disentangle capitalism from the criminal justice system. I think it's such a tragedy that, you know, we're sending so many of our residents who are incarcerated to Arizona. We're basically creating profit for companies that aren't here, and I think that needs to stop. I think the other thing that I think about is, like, if you are incarcerated, I would really like to see those individuals being cared for, at least medically, both with having mental health services and also medical services. I read some research that indicated that 43% of those incarcerated have a chronic condition. And especially as our population, our incarcerated population is getting older, we're seeing more of that. And the medical copays that many states have are just incredibly high. So Hawaii is pretty reasonable. It's $3 to see a physician, but Texas is $13.55, and follow-ups, same copay. If they prescribe you medication, that's another. And, you know, usually the standard pay for someone who's incarcerated is 50 cents an hour. So even in Hawaii, it'll take like 6 hours of work if you're unwell. And I think that that's something that we really need to address.
I would definitely agree with what you're sharing, Lorinda. I was thinking along those lines as well. I also think that we need to redirect how we utilize our budget in Hawaii. And I know that there's been lots of data and research around how much we spend on a person to be incarcerated versus what we spend on a student in the DOE. And it is far less to educate us, that we spend on education, than what we do for someone to be incarcerated. And then you look at what is the return on investment of both of those, and I mean, you folks all know that. So some policies around that, and I know that there have been suggestions, there's been bills that have been written, but nothing really gets past the line, and we seem like we just have to continuously fight, and Kat is the epitome of that each year at the legislature, where things don't get through, and there's simple things that we would think is logical, things that would be meaningful for a first world kind of state or country, and then yet we don't do it in Hawaii. And so and we would get some of the results or the outcomes that Lorinda is speaking about. The other thing that I think needs a shift in policies is around our land and our natural resources here in Hawaii. There's so much, there's plentiful resources, but there are only, it's monopolized by different utility companies, different landowners, and it's not it's not equitable and fair. And so I believe that we hold the answers here for us, for our state to thrive, but it is not trickling down to the everyday person.
For me, it would be changing the mindset of the community. Juveniles are not born bad. We have to remember the human brain is not fully developed until they're 25. Teens and young adults are going to make mistakes. That's how they learn. We all made mistakes. It's just a matter if you got caught or not. Most of us that are here in this room, we probably didn't get caught in our mistakes, but we made them. So the community has to understand kids are going to make the mistakes. Those mistakes don't define them as a person. Just focus on how to find that person. Who is that person, and how can we bring that person out? And as they mature, the mistakes will go away. That's just how life works.
Thank you. For me, it would be solitary confinement, and locking up mental health, because that's not going to help them get better, right? We need healing. And also, what Lorinda was saying, bringing our men home, because, and I know that we don't have room, but also changing that ship program that they have there, I think, there's a lot of things that I would love to change, but Judge Ha is right. Changing the mindset, right? Changing the mindset of our community and educating them about, just having them understand, like, these people, including sex offenders, are good people. I know that, and I can say this because, yes, I was sexually molested, but then now that I'm in this position and I'm looking at sex offenders today, either child, teenagers or adults, yes, of course, it's hard. It's hard to look at that, but then at the same time, after they do their time in prison, they shouldn't be sitting there. We're hoping that our programs in the prison are working, right? To heal them, and me talking as the victim, I was a victim. I can say right now that we need to change our mindset and really look at everyone in the system, right? And so, and then also, I would hope that maybe one day, like, and maybe creating something like that, because like a building for law enforcement to get healing. I'm talking about police officers, correctional officers, any law enforcement. There's something that happened in Kentucky that they have a building there where it is for law enforcement, where they get free therapists, and they have weight rooms and a snack room and a lunch room, and just hang out over there, right? And this is somewhere they can reset, because going into the prison and going out in the streets as a law enforcement officer, they have PTSD, So if they're not good and they go into the prison, then all of that is going to go on the men and the women who are in there. So we're just re-traumatizing them. So, maybe if we could start with law enforcement and correctional officers, and maybe create a place of healing for them that they can go talk to the therapist, whatever, so that when they go back to work and they go back into the prison or back on the street, they can maybe use that, talk to them like human beings, and feel better and have that reset. So,
Thank you. I always think about a very simple phrase: hurt people hurt people. And when we think about that, and we ignore the root causes of what's hurting us, is perpetuating more hurt. So thank you for that. One last ending, I want to give everybody a few seconds because we want to make sure that we have time for Q&A. And in a couple of words, if you can be so succinct, what gives you hope for creating a justice system in Hawaii that heals? And I want to center the end on hope. Part of our kuleana in my office has been driven by Auntie Puanani Burgess, and she's instructed me and mentored me and many others in this state to center on hope. Hope-centered care, hope-centered principles, and thinking about the concept of pono and the levels of pono that's in our state motto. What gives you hope for creating a justice system in Hawaii that heals? Let's start with you, Judge.
Lately, I'd probably say in the past 2 to 3 years, there has just been a massive move by community wanting to see change. That's what gives me hope. The fact that the discussion is occurring and that there are so many that want to be part of the change.
For me, it is looking at the next generation and working with the OPO and their brightness to this that's happening here in Hawaii.
I'm going to echo what Jamie said. To me, it's working with the youth, hearing their stories, and just hearing how much they understand the world around them, probably more than I did at their age.
I'm just thinking of how growing up here, we're taught, like, when you go to the beach, leave the beach better than when you came, like, leave it better than that. And so I also think of that when I meet people and approaching people in the criminal justice system, if you're in that line of work or if you're doing anything in that area, that would be your hope as well.
For me, is watching lived experience become successful and just watching the men and women just doing good, going to school, getting their doctor, just achieving those goals that they never could achieve as a kid. Yeah.
Thank you so much. This was so enriching. What a wonderful conversation. And so thank you for sharing all your mana'o and your stories, your experiences in this area. And we're going to switch to questions. And so we have a couple questions online. That we want to
Yes.
for the
So we
panelists.
have one question online, and then Catherine is going to walk around for anyone here in person who has questions for our panel. One question online asks, is there room in trauma-informed justice systems to acknowledge how a biased system contributes to overrepresentation of Native Hawaiians or Micronesians in the justice system? For instance, the attitudes towards people from Micronesia and the influence that has towards stereotypes and violence perpetuated towards Micronesian youth within the school system. So this is thinking about stereotypes perpetuated in the criminal justice system and how that perpetuates harm, and then also how that then trickles down into the education system.
So one of the things is you have to recognize that the community, again, has to change their mindset. Especially with Micronesian youth. I mean, our Native Hawaiian youth, they're disconnected from their culture. Many of them have never experienced, they know very few words, they've never gone on the land to work. They know nothing about their culture. But the Micronesian youth, you take it one step beyond. Because not only do they not know their culture and are they away from their land, they're not welcomed in the land that they're on. So where do they belong? So if you take that mindset that that's where they're coming from, they don't belong anywhere. This isn't their land, they don't belong there. This is, they're unwelcomed here. So what are they supposed to do? They're gonna react.
Thank you for those. Any audience questions? Right up front. Zoom people.
When you say that the community has to change, you have to look at the whole context. The media is based on this good, bad binary. And it's some of my greatest teachers are people who have been in prison or are in prison. I spent a good part of my day on the phone with people from Arizona, our people from Arizona, who are lifers. And how do you give hope to somebody? But the people are, that's my hope. My hope is the people. They're incredible. And right before he hung up today, he said, wow, I really feel your love. And that is so, I can take that with me. And I said, it's not just me. We have a community of people who care about you. I said, you're my waking thought and you're my affirmations before I go to sleep, you know, just for your protection. So I think if we ask people what they need, and I think Kimmy said it, and so did Nani, we mostly tell people what they need. They know what they need, but we never ask them. And when we ask them, that's the door to change, in my view.
Thank you for that. I always think about the programs that we have developed, and I have conversations with my colleagues about programs. Are a lot of the programs we have that are developed in our recovery systems are developed for people that are in the stage of change of action. In the stages of change model there, it's developed for people to be in the action mode. And so many people aren't ready to change. They don't even know that they need to, and they don't know that they want to, and they don't know what they need to change. So when we think about really meeting people where they are, accepting that people are pre-contemplative in changing the way that they utilize substances or the way that they engage in practices that they feel are survival mode practices. We might think of them as crimes to run away, but when we think about it as survival mode or being able to survive from emotionally traumatic thoughts, it's how do we create programs and systems that are designated for every level of where someone's in a stage of change. Another question over here. Nikos.
Aloha. Thank you all for being here tonight. And when we think about how community attitudes need to change, key members of our community are policymakers. And it's astounding to me that I don't think there are any elected officials here in this conversation tonight to listen. How can we better get to them, invite them to listen to what the wisdom offered here today? How can we better actualize that? For example, I looked up the list of ACEs again, adverse childhood experiences. 2 of them is the presence of substance use in a household, and also the presence of mental illness in a household. What can we do as a community to ensure that people have greater access to therapeutic opportunities to deal with those situations, instead of using the criminal legal system as a backstop? And and it's often the first stop. So just a comment and an inquiry there.
And I think about the comment that was made earlier about return on investment. And this is the social return on investment, to think about the preventative, the cost of incarceration versus the cost of education. This is our social return on investment. We think about the bottom line in budget, right? The bottom line is it's extremely expensive to ignore ACEs.
And one thing that they were doing in Aotearoa is within the judiciary, they had mental health professionals, and every youth that came in the system had a mental health exam. So they were able to catch anything that was coming through. Now, granted, not everybody has something, but at least they checked. You know, we should be checking. The DOE should be testing every kid that has one red flag for a learning deficiency before they give up on school and just say, you know, it's too hard, or they don't get me, I give up. We need to have these opportunities available.
I'm thinking of Aotearoa as well. I was there this past January, and just thinking from a preventative mindset, I went to the One Love concert, and outside of the concert, I decided to leave early. It was so hot, but they had people patrolling the streets, like just security guard looking. They're walking around with water, checking on people. And I had to catch my Uber like maybe 5 minutes away from the concert, and they still had people out there. So not just the perimeter of where the concert was, but also beyond that, and recognizing that, okay, there's this event going on, but we have a kuleana, we have a responsibility, and it might have cost more money to kind of put forward these preventative measures, like having water, having people patrolling. But I was so surprised by just like how effective that was. There was actually someone at a bus stop that looked like he needed some help, and 2 people responded to him, where he looked like he was kind of aggressive and could have gotten into a fight with someone that was prevented. And then at another point, I see an officer talking to someone that I was like, okay, they like clearly had too much to drink, but the officer is like sitting there listening to them attentively, and I was just so astonished, and I was like, this is just not what we see, especially like a concert setting, that I had to call my boyfriend and like tell him this whole scenario. And you know, these are like small things that are so different and like foreign to us that I'm just seeing in other spaces. And so kind of just bringing that other mindset from my time at Aotearoa.
I'm part of this tri-country research study, school to prison pipeline, and this is just my own observation. I think I shared it at the last panel I was on with you, Kat. It was that in going into the women's prison and men's prison, the Kanaka that I interact with, out of all of them, I've only met one student or adult now that had gone through Hawaiian immersion education. She left when she was in the 6th grade, I think, so she didn't go all the way. But every other person that I've interacted there with was in regular DOE mainstream, or they didn't finish school. So something about being in your, and then, so I talked with my other colleagues in Aotearoa and in Australia, and they recognize the same thing too, that the Maori or the Aboriginal people that they work with were in mainstream education that got caught up in the school to prison pipeline and not in their indigenous language schools. And so I don't know, there's just something there. That's just my observation, in that if you're culturally grounded, most likely you will not get sucked up into that system. Anyways.
We could go on all night, and I'm willing to. But I really wanted to thank you all. Thank you for the questions, the thoughtful conversation, the brilliant minds that each of you have. The Native Hawaiian perspective with these brilliant women is so appreciated. So thank you for spending your time tonight, giving us insights on your folks' perspective. I'm going to turn it, and thank you to the audience for being here tonight, for those on Zoom, and I'll turn it over to close us out.
Mahalo to our panelists and moderator for facilitating such a comprehensive and important conversation. And thank you for sharing each of your stories to us. Mahalo especially to Kimi for sharing your personal story, and it touched all of us. On behalf of the Committee on Equality and Access to the Courts, I want to thank each of you for everything, everything you do to perpetuate justice and advocate on behalf of our community. This now concludes the speaking portion of this event. I'd like to welcome everyone downstairs for some light food and refreshment. We ask that you please vacate the building by 7:30-ish. It is going to be locked down unless you want to spend the night here. Mahalo for your kukua, and have a wonderful and safe night.